I found a beautiful bottle by the river. Inside the bottle was a note. The note was written in blood-red ink. The person who finds this bottle will die within a month. A chill ran down my spine, and I cursed under my breath. I quickly tore the note into pieces. Then, I smashed the bottle into a million shards. Later that afternoon, the hospital's test results came back, and I learned I was in the late stages of cancer. My head was spinning as I walked out of the hospital, my mind a chaotic mess. Could it really be a coincidence? I had only picked up a bottle. I was just 24, with so much left to do. I didn't want to die just yet. My mind blank, I crouched in a corner outside the hospital and began to cry loudly. Having grown up without parents and losing my boyfriend, Jake, in a car accident, who could I share this pain with? Back at my small apartment, I sank onto the bed, wiping my tears as I lay down, and soon fell into a deep sleep. The next morning, I planned to return to the hospital for further examination. As I passed by the river, I suddenly remembered the words from the bottle, "The person who finds it will die within a month." Could it be that my illness was truly caused by that bottle? What a strange twist of fate. I returned to the spot where I had found the bottle. And there was another bottle quietly lying by the river. This drift bottle looked exactly like the one I had just smashed. It was a narrow-necked glass bottle sealed with a soaking wet cork. I struggled to pull it out. Inside the second bottle was another note, the handwriting crooked and barely legible. I guess the person who wrote it might not have been in a stable mental state. On the 30th day stranded on the island, I was losing hope. It seemed no one was coming to rescue me. I should have realized this was Death Island. How could there be any chance of survival? No one would remember me. Anyone who reads this note must never come to this island. I hope I'm the last one to leave a message. Could someone be trapped on an island, pouring their last tears into a bottle? Frowning, I hurriedly called the police. The authorities arrived quickly. One officer examined the marks on the cap, while another studied the note. Based on the moisture of the cork, they estimated the bottle had been thrown into the river within the last 10 hours. Considering the current speed of the Songhua River, the bottle likely originated from 80 to 130 kilometers upstream, somewhere between Shulon City and Yushu City. As far as I could tell, there were no uninhabited islands matching the note's contents within that range. So, this bottle might just be a prank or a delusion of someone with a mental illness. Rest assured, the police will investigate further. If someone is truly trapped somewhere, we won't stand by. After the officers took the bottle away, I sat alone by the river, watching the water flow quietly. The doctor at the hospital said my condition was serious, and I needed to be hospitalized immediately, with little hope for recovery, only symptom relief. After a series of tedious tests, I returned home to pack my things, preparing for hospitalization the following day. I even cleared all my social media accounts, formatted my hard drive, and wrote a letter, unsure of who it should be addressed to. When I woke up, I grabbed my luggage and decided to head to the hospital early. Passing the river again, I noticed something glimmering at the water's edge. No way! I quickly scrambled down the riverbank and fished a bottle from the icy water. Finding 1 or 2 bottles might be a coincidence, but finding 3 in a row was truly unusual. I eagerly pulled out the cork, and the next moment, I stood in shock, unable to believe my eyes. Inside the bottle was not only a note but also a faded silver ring. If I remembered correctly, this was the ring I had given Jake as a token of our love. His ashes must now be peacefully resting in the Jiangnan cemetery, along with my memories. Back home, I tossed my bag aside, sat at my desk, took a deep breath, and opened the letter in the bottle. The letter read, "I'm dying, I deserve it. If it weren't for me, Jake wouldn't have died. Jake was my boyfriend. Was there more to the story behind his accident?" I inhaled deeply, calming myself before reading further. On November 19th, Jake and I went to the Shingon Mountains for a river rafting adventure. As I read, I recalled that I couldn't swim, and he had desperately tried to save me, but I accidentally drowned. Reading this, I felt relieved. It seemed Jake truly could not swim. Furthermore, the cause and location of his death didn't add up. Even if he had gone rafting in the Greater Shingon Mountains, he couldn't have drowned there. He had died in Jilin, struck by a dump truck. I couldn't find her body. I only retrieved the ring from her hand, the one I had given her. Now, I too was nearing death, hoping to reunite with her in another world. I sighed, feeling sorrow in my heart, too afraid to look again. That afternoon 6 months ago, I had found myself in a similar situation. I couldn't piece her body back together, I could only hold tightly to her severed hand, gripping the ring on her finger as I let out a weak howl of grief. Looking back, I felt a kinship with the woman who cast the drift bottle. We were both unfortunate souls adrift in life. We were both dying, having witnessed our boyfriends die before our eyes. Ironically, our boyfriends even shared the same name, and the rings we gave them were identical. But when I read the next line, I felt a chill run through me, as if all the blood in my body had frozen.
Jean Ting's final note.
My name was also Jenna Jean, which couldn't be mere coincidence. Was someone playing a cruel joke on me, plotting something sinister against a cancer patient who had nothing left, whose life was nearly over? Why were they doing this? It terrified me. And now they wanted to inherit my debts too? I abandoned my plan to go to the hospital and pulled out my phone to open Google Maps. According to Uncle Hat, the starting point of the second drift bottle should be about 80 to 130 kilometers from where I was. Since I had found those 3 bottles almost simultaneously, they had likely been thrown at approximately the same time and distance. I booked a ticket, determined to investigate this matter further. After all, I didn't have much time left, so it was better to resolve the mystery in my mind than to spend a few more days in the hospital. After nearly 2 hours on a train and several more on a bus, I finally arrived in Qianjiang Village, Shulin City. Qianjiang Village is located by the Songhua River, a perfect 80 kilometers from my home. I could follow the river north to get there. Gritting my teeth, I walked for several kilometers. The river was calm, and the water showed no signs of anything unusual. I was starting to feel exhausted, overwhelming fatigue washed over me, and my limbs felt powerless, as if I couldn't go on. A few months ago, I thought I had slimmed down from dieting, only to discover that the shadow of cancer was lurking behind it. Looking at the distance of several kilometers on the map, I couldn't help but doubt myself. At my current strength, I had no idea how long it would take to reach my destination. Suddenly, a thought flashed through my mind. The Songhua River had 2 branches that eventually merged into one, flowing downstream. I came up with a plan. Yes, I could wait here, trying to determine if the drift bottles originated upstream or downstream, whether from the main river or a tributary. I had found the first bottle at 7 in the morning. According to Uncle Hat, counting back 10 hours means they were thrown between 9 and 10 the previous night. If I stayed by the river from 8 to 10, I had a good chance of finding a 4th drift bottle. With 4 hours until 8 o'clock, there was no sense in waiting idly by the river. I walked into the village and found a house that looked occupied. I knocked on the door, and an elderly gentleman with a kind face answered. He asked who I was looking for, and I nervously pretended to be a tourist, saying I was visiting and wanted to stay the night. The old man graciously led me to an east side room, waving his hand and saying I could stay for free. "If you're hungry, just let me know, I'll make sure you're full." I dropped my luggage and sat on the bed, stretching my body a bit. The old man brought in a plate of hawthorn berries, a plate of sunflower seeds, and peanuts, chatting away about how few people lived in the village and how rarely he saw outsiders. He was quite pleased to have me passing through. We talked until around 6 in the evening when he headed to the kitchen to start cooking. I finally had the chance to focus on the mystery of the drift bottles. I took out the letter from the 3rd bottle and started reading it again. In the 3 drift bottles, the first contained a note smeared with what looked like blood, as if written with a finger. The second was also a note, but the handwriting was messy. The third contained a complete paper with neat, elegant handwriting. If all these were written by the same person, that person must have a split personality. The edges of the paper were a bit rough. This suggested that the paper had been torn from a notebook. Flipping the letter over, I noticed a black smudge. Likely from accidentally hitting the cutting machine during production. Apart from these useless clues, I couldn't find anything else of value. The aroma of food wafted into the room. I jumped down from the bed, thinking about how delicious the old man's cooking smelled. He really had a gift. With that in mind, I stepped into the kitchen where 3 steaming dishes were set out, and a large pot was simmering with noodles. But the kitchen was empty, the old man was nowhere to be found. I searched the courtyard inside and out but still couldn't see him. Had he gone out? My stomach growled with hunger. I waited for half an hour, but the old man didn't return. This felt a bit odd. The noodles had been cooking for half an hour without anyone checking on them. Didn't he worry about the pot boiling dry? Clumsily, I started to tend the stove, extinguishing the fire and putting on my coat as I stepped outside to look for the old man. Once outside, I realized something even stranger about the village. There were only about 100 households in this village, and it was still light out. It wasn't even 7 yet, but it was utterly silent. Every door and window was tightly shut, with no smoke rising from any chimneys, no sounds of life, not even a dog barking. Gathering my courage, I walked from house to house. Some clearly had families inside, with tables set for dinner and bowls prepared. Others looked as if they were watching TV, with sunflower seeds scattered on the table. In one house, a half-knit sweater lay abandoned, and a person slouched in a chair, while an unfinished homework sheet lay sprawled on the table. But there was no one to be found. Everyone was too busy to come close. Gradually, the light began to fade. I took out a flashlight and left Xinjiang village, heading straight for the riverbank. Looking back, the whole village was engulfed in darkness, eerily silent. I stood by the river, staring at the slowly flowing water, a wave of fear creeping up my spine. Yet, my thirst for the truth ultimately triumphed over my inner dread. I raised my flashlight, scanning the river with a beam of white light. After several minutes, I finally spotted a glimmer in the distance slowly drifting toward me. It was the fourth drift bottle. I quickly took off my shoes, rolled up my pant legs, and stepped into the icy river without hesitation. The bone-chilling cold surged through my skin, but I disregarded the danger, reaching with all my strength for the drift bottle within my grasp. However, my foot slipped, and I lost my balance, falling into the river. Like Jake, I was not a swimmer, and after choking on water, I panicked. Fortunately, the water wasn't deep, and the current by the shore wasn't strong. I struggled to climb back onto the bank and eagerly grasped the drift bottle, opening it right away. Inside the bottle was still that intact paper, the writing was clear, but this time the phrasing was much more mature than what was in the third drift bottle. In my 34 years of life, there are no regrets. I've succeeded in my studies and career. My marriage is strong, and my daughter is well behaved. Though I've faced sudden misfortune, I still believe my husband will take great care of our daughter. It looked like yet another letter of despair, with some bloodstains on the paper, possibly from when the writer coughed up blood while writing. I didn't understand what kind of force had brought me from my hospital bed to this island, but I genuinely liked it here. It bore witness to my life. Perhaps someone destined would find this drift bottle. If you are fortunate enough, remember to visit this island of happiness. The letter ended there, without a signature. I raised the letter and couldn't help but wrinkle my nose. I leaned in to sniff it closely. The smell of blood still lingered, not completely faded. Rubbing it with my hand only made the stains more blurred, indicating that the starting point of the drift bottle might not be far from here. My clothes were already soaked with the smell of blood, and the night wind sent a chill through me. I really didn't want to return to Xinjiang village, but if I didn't, I might freeze to death here. I turned on my flashlight and went back to the old man's house, searching everywhere. Unfortunately, I found nothing, and my phone had been ruined by the river water, rendering it useless and unable to call for help. I made up my mind and sat down at the dining table, eating the food haphazardly. After changing into dry clothes, I grabbed a blanket and lay down in the room, preparing to rest. After all, I didn't have long to live. No matter how strange things were happening, they couldn't interrupt my meals and sleep. When I woke up, it was already bright outside. My phone was still dead, and the wall clock had stopped. I didn't know what time it was, but since I had been staying in this village, I clearly couldn't stay any longer. I needed to pack up and leave. All right, I had already organized my luggage, left $200 under the plate, and wrote a note for the old man. After that, I left Xinjiang village and continued upstream along the Songhua River. I kept my eyes on the river, trying to find the island mentioned in the drift bottles. The second drift bottle had said that island was the island of death, never go there. Yet the fourth drift bottle described it as the island of happiness, welcoming those who are destined. Could it be that this river, barely 100 meters wide, hid 2 uninhabited islands? I crossed a patch of woods and looked up at the river, only to find that dense fog had rolled in, gradually lowering and obscuring the view across the riverbank. As I hesitated whether to move forward or wait for the fog to clear, I suddenly heard a splash. Following the sound, I caught a glimpse of something drifting in the fog. It was another drift bottle. This was the 5th drift bottle, and to my surprise, the outline of an island emerged behind it. At the edge of the island, a pale arm dangled weakly in the water, rising and falling with the waves, a conspicuous red bracelet gleaming on the wrist, strikingly bright. I froze in place, almost unable to believe my eyes. Then I trembled and raised my left hand, where I saw a red agate bracelet identical to the one on my wrist, quietly coiling around it. The urge to go to the island grew stronger in my heart, and I took a hesitant step, stepping carefully onto the wet ground and wading into the river. The outline of the island was now just 20 to 30 meters away. However, for some reason, no matter how I walked, the distance between the island and me remained unchanged. I turned to look back, and the thick fog had completely obscured the riverbank. I could see nothing. The current became increasingly swift, and the water was now at my waist. Panic began to wash over me. Did this island really exist? Or was it merely a trap luring me to my death? Just as this thought crossed my mind, I spotted a circular object floating on the water. It was a swim ring. The swim ring had a black and white pattern, resembling a silver snake, and I grabbed it, slipping it around my waist. The buoyancy surrounding me offered some comfort. For some reason, the swim ring felt oddly familiar. Minutes or perhaps hours passed. And I completely lost track of time, mechanically paddling my limbs as I swam toward the island. When I finally touched the shore, all my fatigue and strength vanished in an instant. I struggled to crawl onto the bank, my wet shoes squished against the gravel. Looking around, I saw no one. The arm that had tossed the drift bottle was long gone. I shouted,
Is anyone there?
but received no response. This small island felt desolate, with only a few dead trees standing lonely at the water's edge. Not far away stood a dense forest, with the deeper parts shrouded in mist. I picked up a sturdy branch and ventured into the dimly lit woods. The forest resembled a primordial wilderness, with trees towering impressively, some rising 7 to 8 meters or more, their dense canopies obscured by the surrounding fog, making the environment hazy. To avoid getting lost, I picked up a sharp stone and carved a letter.
J.
Into the trunk of the tree I passed. It was the first letter of my last name, Jiang. This had become a habit of mine. Ever since childhood, I would always mark my stationery, textbooks, or assignments with a letter.
G.
As a signature. The trees were thick, and after walking a few hundred steps, I had completely lost my sense of direction. When I reached the next tree, I raised my hand, intending to carve out 10 letters. But at that moment, I was taken aback to discover that the tree already bore a letter.
G.
Had I retraced my steps? Was I experiencing déjà vu? I closely examined the marks on the tree and noticed they were clean, clearly made recently. Just then, a thought exploded in my mind. I froze and quickly stepped back, gasping. I was only 5'3", while the carving was about 3 to 4 feet high. The letter on the tree was only about a meter above the ground, and I hadn't carved it. Other than me, it seemed there was someone else in the forest. Panic set in completely. I leaned against the tree trunk, gripping that sturdy branch tightly, scanning the open space between the trees and the fog, the only sound my controlled breathing echoing in the air. The surroundings were eerily silent. I cautiously took a step, alert to any sounds around me. Suddenly, in this quiet forest, a deafening roar shattered the tranquility. My legs went weak with fear, and I hurriedly looked toward the source of the sound. What was that? Next to a massive tree, one that 3 people could barely encircle, a huge shadow suddenly appeared. Behind the thick canopy, 2 fist-sized lights flared to life. As the shadow took a step toward me, I finally saw what it was. It was a nearly 10-foot-tall giant bear-human hybrid, with a mouth like a basin and teeth a foot long, glinting ominously. How could there be such a gigantic creature on land? The bear-human continued to roar, relentlessly pursuing me. I didn't have time to think. Survival instinct kicked in, and I ran for my life. At first, I tried to remember which direction I had come from, searching for the marked trees I had left behind.
Soon, I noticed that every tree trunk here bore some letter. J. Some high, some low. I could only choose a random direction to escape, hoping to leave this forest as quickly as possible. The wind howled in my ears, mixed with indistinct voices. I heard a familiar name. Jenna, come here. My steps faltered, and I lost my balance, tumbling to the ground like a rolling barrel. Who was calling me? Jimmy? Jenna, don't be afraid. The bear's roar came from behind, growing louder, while a stranger's voice softly called to me from ahead. I struggled to get up and shouted. Who are you? Emerging from the dark corner was a small figure, an elderly woman with a wrinkled face, holding a rusted machete. Her cracked lips parted slightly, and she spoke in a raspy voice. Jenna, come to Grandma. Grandma will protect you. When I saw her clearly, a strong urge welled up inside me. I wanted to rush over and hug that small but commanding grandmother. but my grandmother had passed away 15 years ago. The dead cannot return, unless they are not truly alive. I began to regret following that mysterious drift bottle to this bizarre place. The bear was getting closer, I could almost smell its strong, foul odor. Still, anything was better than being ripped apart by the bear. I ran toward Grandma, glancing back to see her arms wide open, standing protectively like a hen shielding her chicks. Next, she raised the machete high, swinging it at the oncoming beast. In that instant, it felt like something was churning inside me, the world spun, and a sharp pain shot through my head. I remembered that Grandma had taken me in when I was 3, after my mother abandoned me. The villagers used to say that my father had married an auntie, while my mother had run off with some uncle. I didn't join Grandma until I was 8. But wait, how did Grandma die? Why did I remember so many details about her? Sitting on the ground, I sensed that this scene Grandma confronting the bear seemed familiar. The bear swung a massive paw as big as a car door, sending strong winds as it struck at Grandma. Suddenly, a memory sparked, my head was on fire as I dashed forward, positioning myself in front of Grandma. When I was 8, I had gotten lost while playing and wandered into the mountains, where I encountered the bear. Grandma had been searching for me, and in a sudden act of heroism, she saved me from the bear's jaws while I was pinned beneath its massive paw. Her death had haunted my childhood, a nightmare that replayed every night. I would wake up screaming, seeing my dear Grandma, still so loving. As time passed, my brain had gradually suppressed all memories of her. Now, it was my turn to protect you, Grandma. Everything seemed so absurd, the resurrection of Grandma, the omnipresent markings, the mysterious island, they didn't matter anymore. No matter who Grandma truly was, I couldn't just stand by and watch her die. Mimicking her stance, I opened my arms, tightly closed my eyes, and awaited death. However, nothing happened. Confused, I opened my eyes to find both the bear and Grandma had vanished, and the foul smell seemed to have never existed. The scene changed, the rocky path now led deep into a dense forest. At the end of the path was a small courtyard. With red walls and a 2-story mud brick house, my uncle's home, familiar to me. I had moved here after Grandma passed away, and it had been exactly 10 years. Although my uncle wasn't particularly kind to me, at least he hadn't let me end up on the street. I stepped into the yard, and everything looked just as I remembered. The rickety swing in the corner was made by my uncle for my cousin. I thought about sitting on it, but my aunt shot me a glance and quickly told me to leave. I had no choice but to retract my gaze and head toward the 2-story house. Suddenly, a gust of cold wind blew through, like a ghost sweeping past the peeling wooden door, seemingly pushed open by some unseen force. A dirty, deflated ball bounced out from behind the door, making a dull, eerie noise. Inside, a voice called, "Stop playing and come eat." I heard faint footsteps approaching and saw a middle-aged woman at the door, softly speaking to the shadows beside her. It was my mother, Mia Jiang. My cousin stepped out of the shadows, obediently taking his aunt's hand. I was taken aback. My cousin was only 2 years younger than me, so why did the child in the doorway look like 6 or 7? I sensed something was off. Suddenly, my aunt turned to look at me. "Jenna, where have you been playing? Come inside, the food will get cold." Her voice was warm like spring, but her expression was as cold as winter. That icy gaze, magnified through thick glasses, swept across my face, sending a chilling shiver down my spine. When I came to my senses, I walked into the house and saw a greasy, dirty wooden table. 3 simple dishes were set on the table. My uncle sat in the main seat, not looking up, engrossed in his newspaper. I took my usual seat, and my aunt placed a bowl of plain white rice in front of me, muttering, "This wild girl never comes home, and she doesn't even know to change out of dirty clothes." Hearing my aunt's words, I instinctively looked down at my outfit, a faded, floral-patterned dress. I couldn't believe it. I lifted my hand to lightly touch the hem of the dress. This was the dress my grandmother had made for me by hand. I remembered that when I turned 10 and grew taller, I could no longer wear this dress. The red agate bracelet on my wrist was long gone, replaced by a pink digital watch. I felt a wave of confusion. Was it possible that I had never grown up, never gone to study in another city, never met my boyfriend Jake, and never had cancer? Was all of this just a dream, like a fleeting fantasy? Just then, a sudden clap of thunder interrupted my thoughts. I didn't notice when the torrential rain started outside, accompanied by flashes of lightning. And the room remained dim. I fumbled to pick up the chopsticks and took a bite of rice. The steaming hot food felt icy cold in my mouth. I looked around. My uncle remained in the dark, flipping through the newspaper, avoiding eye contact. My aunt stood next to the pot, holding a bowl brimming with rice, yet she mechanically scooped more rice, ladling it from the pot. Ladles full of white rice were carelessly dumped into bowls, some spilling onto the floor. Unbeknownst to me, my cousin Ming had quietly left the room, sitting expressionlessly on the swing in the yard. As the rain poured down, he swayed back and forth, the creaking sound cutting sharply through the rain. Each swing rose higher and higher. I reached the door, and even though it stood wide open, it felt like an invisible force was holding me back. The eerie scenes flooded my mind, sending chills through me. I ascended the stairs and returned to my small room. The strong wind flung the long-neglected window wide open, and my diary flapped in the breeze, its pages fluttering. My gaze fell on the orange diary, the childish handwriting appearing line by line. My uncle and aunt treat me poorly, my classmates always bully me. My uncle ignores me, only caring for Ming. Even though he made a swing for Ming, I wanted to play too, but my aunt scolded me. If only Dad and Mom were still here, but they had abandoned me. I stood frozen in place, hearing a faint child's voice echoing from some corner. I love my home, where Mom and Dad are always with me. As I grew up, it seemed like there were always many invisible little friends sitting in my room, forming a circle and laughing innocently. Suddenly, the content of the nursery rhyme shifted. Jenna Jiang is so pitiful, with no parents, always disliked. She's a jinx, a burden to her father and mother, a bane to others. I screamed, desperately trying to cover my ears, but those voices wouldn't disappear. The diary was whipped by the wind, and the black watercolor pen scribbled despairing phrases onto the yellowed pages. Dad and Mom don't want me anymore. Dad and Mom don't want me anymore. Dad and Mom don't want me anymore. Childhood wounds were torn open again. And I struggled violently, trembling as I fled the room, slamming the door shut behind me. I returned to the dining room, where my uncle and aunt continued their mechanical motions. I mustered the courage to approach, waving my hand in front of my uncle's face, but he ignored me, simply flipping the newspaper to the back. The headline caught my attention. Murder fugitive captured after 5 years. The words were shocking. According to the reporter, the police had recently apprehended a suspect in a murder case who had been on the run for 5 years. The victim was a married couple in the Changi district of Jilin City. Thanks to the joint efforts of the police from both regions, the suspect, a man named Gao, had finally been caught. Just as I finished reading, my uncle snatched the newspaper from my hands and said, "Well, fate can be hard to defy." At that moment, a phone call came from the police, announcing a breakthrough in my brother and sister-in-law's case, which had entered the second trial phase. Should we tell Jingting's child? He had no idea what had happened. Although my brother and sister-in-law's incident was in the past, their grandmother had just passed away. Revealing this now might be too much for him to bear. I had secretly flipped through Jingting's diary and discovered he had been bullied by his classmates. "You should visit his school and talk to the teachers." "All right, I'll go tomorrow." "Don't worry, stop blaming Jingting too much, he's actually a good kid." "What's wrong with blaming him a bit? That old swing was flimsy anyway, it's no big deal that it broke. But if Jingting gets hurt, how can we face your brother?" Understanding dawned on me, and the knots of my childhood began to unravel. I closed my eyes, letting tears flow freely. "Silly child, why are you crying?" I opened my eyes to meet my aunt's kind and gentle gaze. The storm outside had disappeared, and the room was filled with the warm aroma of food, calm and serene. I wiped my tears with my cold wrist. As my bracelet brushed against my heated cheeks, a faint smile crossed my face, and my heart was full of longing. "Thank you, Uncle and Aunt." My uncle took a sip of tea and said softly, "Go on, Jenna, to where you need to be." I nodded, a bit confused. My uncle's words perplexed me, and just as I was about to ask, I suddenly heard a deep male voice from my left. I turned to see Mia Jiang standing there, 22 years old, waving at me with a familiar smile. Then, his figure vanished quickly. After the 3 figures disappeared, the once bright and tidy room instantly felt empty, as if no one had lived there in decades. Thick dust covered everything. I exited the room and followed a winding path to the courtyard, with the distant highway guiding me toward the future. The series of bizarre events brought back memories I was reluctant to recall. I didn't understand why these things were happening, but an uneasy premonition began to form in my heart. I had seen this highway in countless nightmares before. I knew that the moment my heart began racing was imminent. I started to speed up, the panic and unease shadowing me. Within that fear, there was an inexplicable sense of anticipation. Suddenly, a stationary semi-truck came into view, and the air grew still, not even a breeze stirred. At that moment, I felt an illusion, as if I were a character in a movie, and this road and moment were merely part of a film reel. Stumbling toward the heavily overloaded truck, which was carrying rolls of steel that bent the trailer's floor, I saw the driver's face full of terror, as if he would scream in despair any second. Following the driver's gaze, I spotted that familiar SUV, the figure I missed day and night. He was in the driver's seat, focused intently on the road ahead. In the next second, the out-of-control truck would crash, and his young life would come to an end. Yet here I was, trapped in this moment, gazing at the man I loved, my heart breaking. Tears streamed down my face. Jake, I miss you so much. Learning about Jake's death was the darkest moment of my life. 2 hours after the accident, I sat in the police car, arriving at the scene. I looked at the twisted wreckage. The thick smoke had dissipated, leaving behind scattered human remains and that gleaming engagement ring. I had fantasized countless times about what I saw in those last seconds before the accident. What was I thinking? Now, the mysterious power of this island had brought me back to that moment. The car door swung open, and I silently watched him for a long time. I finally spoke, my voice choked. I'm sorry. He had rushed onto the highway after finishing a business trip to make it in time for my birthday, only for that day to become his death day. My gaze lingered on the cake box and bouquet in the back seat, and tears uncontrollably flowed. Only one phrase surged in my mind: I'm sorry. Jake's voice echoed at dawn, yet his figure remained still. I'm so sorry I couldn't be with you on your birthday. If only I could take one more look in the rearview mirror. I'm sorry, Jenna. I will never be able to make it to your birthday again. At that moment, I heard the thoughts in his final moments. So, I opened my arms and embraced him one last time. It's okay, he won't have another birthday. I haven't taken good care of myself, and I'll soon be coming to find you. You must wait for me, remember to wait for me. I tilted my head, wrapping my arms around his neck and gently kissing his lips, while the lake blue box lay quietly nearby. The sparkling diamond ring on her neck was a fiery brilliance, and it suddenly dawned on me. No wonder he said he wanted to give me the surprise I had long awaited, the moment that ring slipped onto my ring finger. The air seemed to begin moving, a gentle breeze brushing against us. I heard her long-awaited words. Happy birthday, Jenna. Let's get married. I wiped my tears and nodded deeply. In that moment, an invisible force seemed to pull me out of the stilled world. It was like hitting the fast-forward button. The piercing sound of a horn shattered the sky as the roaring trailer accelerated, charging toward Jake's SUV. The truck flipped, steel coils scattered, and flowers and cake were reduced to mush on the ground, while the ring on my finger still shone with radiant light. Moments later, everything before me suddenly vanished without a trace. The wide highway transformed instantly into a winding path that led to an ornate 9-story tower, its plaque emblazoned with 3 bold characters, and sharp turns reminded me to be cautious. This was the heart of the island. I walked toward the tower and pushed the door open. Inside, the light was bright, and a spiral staircase wound upward. This was clearly a place of books. From the 1st to the 9th floor, there were shelves stacked full of books. I pulled a notebook from the shelf and casually flipped to the day I registered for college, the day Grandma didn't come to see me off. She had said she was too old, that her legs didn't work well, and she didn't want to be a burden to us. Mom and I understood. Grandma was actually afraid that she wouldn't be able to hold back her tears, worried about being laughed at. This diary chronicled a life. The writer's name was Jiang Jingting. Unlike me, Jiang Jingting's parents hadn't experienced a robbery or suffered any fatal accidents. He hadn't gotten lost in the mountains, leading to Grandma's death. I replaced this diary on the shelf and pulled out another one. I'm 75 this year. I won't live much longer. My husband had been with me all these years, and now he was suddenly gone. The doctor said he passed quickly, without pain. On the day of the funeral, he lay in a crystal coffin, peaceful and solemn, just as his name suggested, dignified. This diary recorded the happy life of Jiang Jingting and Jake, who had 2 daughters, each with their own families and careers. I flipped through page after page, as if living out a different life. Each branch of life felt like another choice made by Jiang Jingting. I began to think of the theory of parallel worlds. Beyond the universe, there exist countless parallel universes, each with a parallel self. When we make choices, there are surely innumerable versions of ourselves choosing differently, walking down various paths. This mysterious island and tower are converging points of all lifelines. Time here seems to run faster. I don't know how long it took, but I finally finished reading every diary and reached the 9th floor, where a diary identical to the previous ones lay quietly on the table. On the other side of the table was a pen and a familiar narrow glass bottle, sealed with a cork and containing clear wine. I picked up this diary that belonged to me, feeling a mysterious force, as if a witness to history had perfectly recorded my short 24 years of life within it. I opened this diary of my life, reliving each memory. When I turned to the last page, a door of light suddenly appeared from the void. At that moment, from across the table, a golden bridge extended from the light door, reaching up to the clouds. Below, the river glittered under the sun. I approached the door, exhaling slowly. Then, I turned and grabbed the glass bottle, downing the wine in one go. The exquisite drink was refreshing and fragrant, as if it distilled the essence of life. I opened the diary, pausing the pen on the last page before writing. Even if I must face death tomorrow, I will cherish this last moment. Jenna Jiang, I am proud of your life. I recalled the several drift bottles I had found. Some contained playful pranks from Jiang Jingting, while others expressed his life's regrets. Some drift bottles captured Jiang Jingting facing life with a smile, writing goodbyes. Others showed his unwillingness to accept reality, attempting to escape this island of solitude. I wanted to offer encouragement to any Jiang Jingting who found the drift bottles. I carefully rolled up the paper, placing it inside the glass bottle. The back of the paper bore a black smudge, just like the final note in the 3rd drift bottle. I stepped into the light door and onto the golden bridge, tossing the drift bottle into the river, watching it disappear into the sky. Jake, I'm coming.